Welcome to the debate. When a highly calibrated seismograph registers a massive earthquake, our first instinct is entirely predictable.
Right. We immediately assume the tectonic plates deep beneath our feet have ruptured.
Exactly. We naturally look for the external cause. But what if the plates are perfectly still and the machine is just, vibrating on the table?
Which brings us to the rather terrifying question for today. When thousands of people suddenly report hearing voices or feeling invisible pressure in their skulls, is it a massive psychological breakdown?
A breakdown fueled by the internet and modern environments, yes.
Or conversely, are they the test subjects for a new generation of invisible directed energy weapons?
The stakes here are incredibly high. The source material we are drawing from spans clinical neurobiology, environmental psychology, and military biophysics.
It really does cover a massive scope.
It does. And looking at all the evidence points me firmly toward the internal explanation. I see that the vast majority of these experiences are rooted in human neurobiology, specifically profound disruptions in how the brain processes its own inner speech.
So internal misfires?
Right, internal misfires. And these are being heavily exacerbated by modern environmental triggers, ranging from the, dopamine overload of excessive screen time to the socially contagious echo chambers of online communities.
Well, I take the opposing view here. While I certainly acknowledge the reality of psychopathology, we know it exists, the documented biophysics of the microwave auditory effect cannot be ignored.
But is it actually being deployed?
I'd argue yes. Combined with the known, heavily funded military development of directed energy weapons, it proves that the external technological induction of these exact symptoms is a highly plausible reality.
A plausible reality, maybe, but...
Let me just finish this thought. I argue that we cannot simply blanket dismiss these reports as psychiatric illness when the technology to covertly induce them is an established physical fact.
Okay, well, let's start by laying out the foundation of the neurobiological perspective. Because the most robust, evidence-based explanations for these phenomena actually reside within the human brain itself.
You're talking about the University of New South Wales study?
Yes, the UNSW research. It provides tangible biological evidence for why people hear voices. It essentially comes down to a biological prediction error.
So basically, a failure of the auditory cortex to suppress internal signals.
Exactly. When a healthy person utilizes inner speech, that silent voice in your head narrating your thoughts right now, the auditory cortex actually becomes less active.
Because it knows the sound is coming.
Right. The brain predicts the sound of its own voice and dampens its response. It essentially noise cancels your own thoughts so you do not confuse them with someone actually speaking to you.
Wait, so in these patients, the brain is basically failing to noise cancel its own thoughts.
Precisely. Think of it like a microphone placed too close to a speaker. It creates that horrible screeching feedback loop.
Oh, sure.
The equipment isn't broken, and there is no external band playing that screeching noise. The system is just failing to isolate the input from the output. And the UNSW electroencephalogram, or EEG study, shows the brain does exactly this.
How did they actually test that, though?
In their experiment, they had participants imagine saying syllables like ba or be, while simultaneously playing those exact sounds through headphones.
To measure how the auditory cortex physically responds to the overlap.
Yes, exactly. In the healthy control group, when the imagined syllable matched the external audio, the EEG showed reduced activity in the auditory cortex. The brain said, I know this sound, I produced it, I can tune it out.
But for the group with hallucinations?
The results were entirely reversed. Instead of suppression, their EEG showed an enhanced response. The brain was caught in a neurological feedback loop.
Wow.
It reacted more strongly to its own inner speech, processing it as if it were a sudden intrusion from someone else. This perfectly explains why patients are so thoroughly, unshakably convinced the voices are real.
Because to them, they are.
Right. They are real neurological events. They are just originating internally.
Well, I come at it from a different way. That beautifully explains a broken microphone, I'll give you that. And the neurobiology of classical schizophrenia is not in dispute here.
Okay, but
But assuming every anomalous auditory experience is a manifestation of psychosis is a dangerous oversimplification. I mean, what if someone is actually broadcasting on that frequency?
broadcasting voices directly into someone's head?
Yes, we have to look at the established biophysics, specifically the microwave auditory effect, also known as the Frey effect, which was first published in 1961. This is not science fiction, it is fundamental physics.
But it relies on microscopic heating, correct?
Exactly, thermoelastic expansion. It is a fascinating and, frankly, terrifying mechanism. When pulsed radio frequencies interact with the human head, they cause a rapid, minuscule heating of the brain tissue.
We're talking incredibly small amounts of heat, though.
Right. Heating by maybe a millionth of a degree on a microsecond timeline. But because it happens so incredibly fast, the water inside the brain tissue expands slightly and creates a microscopic shock wave.
A mechanical pressure wave.
Exactly. That wave travels through the bone of the skull and is processed directly by the cochlea in the inner ear. The result is that sounds, clicks, buzzes, and potentially even spoken words can be heard only within the target's head.
Completely bypassing the external ears.
Exactly.
Well, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because you are ignoring the profound physical limitations of that technology. Yes, the Frey effect is a real biophysical phenomenon. I'm not denying that.
But you think it can't be weaponized?
Experts like bioengineer Kenneth Foster and physicist Bill Guy have pointed out the massive constraints regarding power density. To transmit sustained sound, let alone coherent, continuous sentences that mimic the complex voices heard by psychiatric patients, requires an immense amount of energy.
So you are arguing the thermal load would be too high?
Exactly. The physics dictate that the acoustic wave amplitude is determined by the absorbed energy per pulse. To reach the threshold of a sustained, disruptive auditory hallucination via microwaves, the thermal heating would be catastrophic.
You think it would cook them?
You would literally suffer severe thermal burns to your brain tissue before you were significantly bothered by the noise. The microwave auditory effect can produce clicks and pops, sure. But continuous conversational harassment defies the laws of thermodynamics.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The idea that this technology is limited to simple clicks and pops is outdated.
How so? The laws of physics haven't changed.
But our understanding of the pulse characteristics has. The U.S. government's own addendum on the bioeffects of selected non-lethal weapons explicitly states that microwave hearing is tunable.
Tunable meaning what exactly?
Because the characteristic sounds depend on the pulse characteristics of the radio frequency energy, the document notes that it is possible to develop the technology to the point where words could be transmitted.
Actual words?
Yes. Transmitted to be heard like the spoken word, except that it could only be heard within a person's head. Speech-modulated microwave energy transmitting numbers from 1 to 10 has actually been successfully demonstrated in laboratory settings.
And I'm sure it required a massive setup.
Microphones placed right next to the subject picked up absolutely nothing, though. It was entirely internal.
But again, transmitting a few numbers in a highly controlled lab setting is vastly different from a covert weapon producing continuous dialogue out in the real world.
But theory is just theory until it is deployed. And we saw what deployment looks like with the Havannah Syndrome. We aren't just talking about people hearing clicks.
We're talking about a very contested set of symptoms.
We're talking about directed energy causing acute neurological trauma. U.S. diplomats stationed in Cuba experienced sudden, intense pressure in their heads, directional noise, and severe cognitive dysfunction.
Yes, they certainly reported those symptoms.
And the University of Pennsylvania published a study in JAMA documenting actual brain injuries in these diplomats. Furthermore, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, NASEM, released a comprehensive report.
I've read the NASEM report.
Then you know they concluded that directed, pulsed radio frequency energy was the most plausible mechanism for these injuries.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on the Havannah Syndrome data. Brain trauma from directed energy doesn't leave a traditional bruise, right? We are essentially looking for ghosts in MRI machines.
which makes it hard to diagnose, sure.
Which is exactly why the elite medical and intelligence agencies cannot agree on what happened. The UPenn study you mentioned has faced massive scientific scrutiny.
Science always involves scrutiny.
Yes, but a recent study by the NIH Clinical Center involving 86 anomalous health incident patients completely failed to replicate the UPenn brain injury findings. They found no consistent evidence of MRI-detectable brain injury.
Even if the brain injury is hard to detect, the symptoms were real.
I'm not saying the symptoms weren't real, but the acoustic evidence points in a radically different direction.
You're referring to the audio recordings taken by the diplomats and the embassies?
Yes. The Jason Advisory Group, an elite panel of physicists consulting for the government, analyzed the audio from the Cuba incidents. They brought in biologists Alexander Stubbs and Fernando Montella Gray-Z to analyze the spectrographic data.
And let me guess, they found bugs.
And this is where the mechanism is so important. A microwave weapon pulsing at a specific frequency leaves a visual signature on a spectrograph, a pulse repetition rate.
Right.
But an insect rubbing its wings together, a process called stridulation, also leaves a signature. The biologists matched the pulse rate, the power spectrum, and the physical oscillations of the sound waves to the calling song of the Indian short-tailed cricket with extraordinarily high confidence.
So you are literally suggesting the diplomats were attacked by crickets?
I am suggesting the Jason group concluded it was highly unlikely that microwaves were involved because no single energy source could produce both the recorded audio signals and the medical effects.
I think that's a stretch.
Add to this the Director of National Intelligence Assessment, which spanned multiple intelligence agencies. They concluded it is very unlikely a foreign adversary is responsible.
So what do you think it was?
This points strongly to a classic case of mass psychogenic illness. It is a sort of contagious, socially transmitted placebo effect, but in reverse, a nocebo effect.
A nocebo effect?
Yes, the extreme, high-stress, paranoid environment of the Cuban embassy created a scenario where the anticipation of a harmful event actually caused genuine, severe physical symptoms.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Dismissing the NASM findings as a cricket-induced panic ignores vast amounts of intelligence and biophysical research.
But the DNI report?
The DNI report may have stepped back from officially blaming the specific foreign adversary, but the technology is undeniably proliferating. Just recently, a joint intelligence investigation detailed by a major news network uncovered a backpack-sized weapon.
Wait, backpack size?
Yes, using Russian components, capable of firing programmable electromagnetic waves through walls.
Hold on, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. You're saying a weapon the size of a standard backpack can shoot programmable, directed electromagnetic waves through a solid concrete wall?
Yes. According to their intelligence sources, the key isn't just raw thermal power that would cook the tissue, as you mentioned earlier. The key is the software.
The software?
It shapes a unique electromagnetic wave that pulses incredibly rapidly. And to your point about thermal limits, physicist Alexander Kostinsky has proposed that these exact symptoms could be induced via the optoacoustic effect from a pulsed infrared laser.
How does that bypass the thermal constraints of a microwave weapon?
Well, microwaves need to heat a large volume of tissue to create a continuous sound. An optoacoustic pulsed infrared laser focuses light absorption very specifically.
Oh, I see.
It creates the pressure wave, the acoustic wave, via light absorption and rapid expansion at specific, superficial layers of tissue. It does this without the massive ambient thermal load of broad radio frequency waves.
Interesting.
It is portable, covert, and entirely capable of creating severe pressure sensations and disorientation. We also have unclassified military documents outlining the Medusa project.
Medusa?
Mob excess deterrent, using silent audio. It was a Navy-funded project designed explicitly to incapacitate targets using silent audio.
But let's look at the logical progression here. If the intelligence community's consensus is that these highly sophisticated military weapons aren't even targeting top-tier diplomats in hostile environments,
You think they wouldn't target civilians?
they certainly aren't targeting everyday civilians in the suburbs. And yet, there are tens of thousands of people online who identify as targeted individuals, claiming they are the victims of this exact,
highly classified directed energy harassment.
Right, the gang stalking phenomenon.
Exactly. And the systematic review of this community by researcher Daniel Heringer and his colleagues is incredibly revealing. They analyzed 500,000 words across Reddit threads and video platforms.
What did they find?
What they found is a novel, modern manifestation of persecutory delusion, fueled entirely by the internet. When people experience high stress, or when their internal neurobiology is compromised, they naturally seek an explanation.
Which is human nature.
But instead of finding psychiatric help, they turn to the internet. They find an echo chamber of thousands of others using highly technical jargon like V2K or voice to skull that validates their paranoia.
And you believe the digital environment is the sole catalyst for these mass reports?
It is a massive environmental trigger. Look at Dr. Victoria Dunkley's clinical case studies on screen-induced psychosis. She had multiple patients, primarily adolescents and young adults, presenting with severe auditory hallucinations and paranoia.
Without any underlying conditions?
They had absolutely no family history of schizophrenia. But they were plugged into interactive screens, video games, endless social media scrolling for 6 or more hours a day.
So you're arguing the screens are actually inducing the biological misfire?
Yes. The constant interactive screen time causes a massive dopamine spike in the brain's reward center. Over time, the dopamine system overloads, and dopamine in excess leads directly to psychotic symptoms.
Which mimics the hallucinations?
The brain becomes oversalient. It attaches extreme paranoid importance to random everyday stimuli. When Dr. Dunkley prescribed a strict 4-week digital fast, completely removing laptops, phones, and video games, the psychotic symptoms resolved completely.
Without medication?
Without heavy-duty antipsychotic medication. The tectonic plates weren't shifting, you see. The machine was just vibrating. Our digital environment is inducing and reinforcing psychiatric symptoms on a massive scale.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that the technical jargon used by these online communities exist because the patents and the defense contracts actually exist?
I mean, patents don't necessarily equal widespread deployment.
You mentioned the Medusa project. It wasn't just theoretical. It was actively evaluated for perimeter protection and crowd control, and the military documentation goes much further than just auditory effects.
In what sense?
It outlines how electromagnetic pulses can cause rhythmic activity synchronization of brain neurons. The brain communicates in electrical rhythms. Alpha waves, for instance, operate around 8 to 15 hertz.
Right, standard brainwave frequencies.
The documentation shows that if you pulse an external electric field at that exact same 15 hertz frequency, the brain's neurons start to mimic it. They synchronize to the external metronome.
And what does that actually do to a person's cognition or physical state?
It essentially jams the normal electrical pathways. It disrupts the normal cortical control of the cortical spinal pathways.
Like a radio jammer.
Exactly. Like a radio station getting drowned out by a stronger signal on the exact same frequency. This causes severe disorientation, intense pressure sensations, and a loss of voluntary muscle control.
Okay, but
My point is this: if this technology, which we know has been developed, is ever abused by state actors or rogue operators, the victims will perfectly, seamlessly mirror psychiatric patients.
where is the evidence of widespread deployment against civilians? I mean, really?
The evidence is obscured by biophysical reality that the weapon leaves no traditional forensic trace. When we use an outdated diagnostic paradigm that assumes if we can't see a weapon, it must be a hallucination, we provide the absolute perfect cover for actual technological abuse.
That's a dangerous path to walk down, though.
Why? When a patient walks into a clinic complaining of unseen voices and sudden bouts of vertigo, and the medical establishment immediately, reflexively writes off all claims as voice-to-skull conspiracy theories, we stop investigating the physical environment.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. Clinical outcomes matter profoundly here.
Of course they do.
If you validate a delusion by entertaining the idea of invisible laser weapons without physical proof, you prevent that person from getting life-saving care.
I'm not saying we should validate delusions.
But if a young man is suffering from screen-induced dopamine psychosis, and he goes online and is told by a community that he is actually the victim of a classified optoacoustic weapon, he will never put down the screen.
He won't get the digital fast.
Exactly. He will never seek the digital detox or the clinical therapy he desperately needs to restore his neurobiology.
I agree that validating purely psychogenic delusions is counterproductive to treatment. I really do. But we cannot allow the mere existence of psychopathology to blind us to the proliferation of non-lethal directed energy.
Well, let's summarize our positions as we draw to a close. I maintain that while the biophysics of microwave hearing are real and documented, they are an incredibly improbable explanation for the vast majority of anomalous auditory experiences and perceived systemic harassment.
Improbable but not impossible.
But the most scientifically robust explanation lies in our internal neurobiology, specifically inner speech prediction errors in the auditory cortex, as demonstrated by the UNSW brainwave studies.
The internal misfire.
Yes. Furthermore, we simply cannot ignore the profound impact of our modern environment. Screen-induced dopamine dysfunction and the massive, validating echo chambers of online communities are creating and amplifying severe psychogenic illness. We must be highly cautious not to let theoretical weapon capabilities distract us from delivering highly effective interventions to people who are genuinely suffering.
And my concluding stance remains that because directed energy capabilities are not merely theoretical, but scientifically validated and actively researched by global militaries, we must maintain a high index of suspicion.
Even without forensic traces.
Yes, the mechanisms of thermoelastic expansion, programmable pulsed radio frequencies, and optoacoustic lasers are documented realities. They are capable of inducing acoustic perception, disorientation, and neurosynchronization from a distance.
It is definitely a frightening capability.
It is. While I readily acknowledge that psychopathology and digital echo chambers are incredibly powerful forces, writing off all victims of anomalous health incidents as delusional is a dangerous oversight. It ignores the reality of modern, covert weapons development and risks leaving genuine victims entirely without recourse.
It really is a deeply complex intersection of human vulnerability.
It absolutely is. Whether the human brain is being manipulated by its own internal misfirings, shaped by the algorithmic forces of digital echo chambers, or targeted by external electromagnetic frequencies, it remains a profoundly susceptible frontier.
There is an immense amount of data in the source material regarding both the biophysics of radio frequency energy and the clinical neurology of psychosis for those who wish to explore this further. It is ultimately up to the listener to weigh the evidence.
Absolutely.
But it brings us back to that seismograph in the sealed room. When the needle starts violently jumping, telling us the world is tearing apart, we have to do the hardest thing possible. We have to figure out if the earth is actually shaking, or if the machine is just breaking itself from the inside out.
Thank you for joining the discussion.